Welcome everybody to the Turnaway lecture series. This lecture is intended to give some of the context and rationale for the Turnaway study. Thank you for joining us. So the genesis of the study was really a need to understand whether abortion hurts women. And that idea had made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, where Kennedy had used the idea that abortion hurts women to make a decision about one abortion procedure. And what he said in his decision was that there was no reliable data, but he thought that women would come to regret their decision and become depressed. And so what is certainly true in this statement is that at that point in 2007, there really weren't reliable data. So the goal of the Turnaway study is to present some reliable data. The recommended reading for this lecture is Vignetta Charles' 2008 article called Abortion and Long-Term Mental Health Outcomes, a Systematic Review of the Evidence. And that is, I think, one of the best articles for describing why this is such an important topic. And just to very briefly discuss some of the issues she raises, why it's hard to study, what the consequences of abortion are. Number one is, who do you compare women who seek abortions to? It's not appropriate to compare them to women who have wanted pregnancies because the circumstances of the women's lives at that point could be very different if they're deciding to end a pregnancy versus have a baby. Some studies have failed to control for the pre-abortion mental health. So for example, if being depressed made a woman want to have an abortion, then women who have abortions would seem to be more depressed than women who don't, but you wouldn't realize without understanding that they were depressed before the abortion, that it was not the abortion causing mental health problems, but the depression, which led possibly to abortion. There are other confounders that would complicate the relationship between mental health and abortion. People have used non-scientific measures of mental health. The selection bias has to do with, for example, Justice Kennedy got his idea that abortion hurts women from an amicus brief by a group of women who regretted their abortion. And so clearly that's not representative, and hence he said it's not reliable data, but it seemed to him that it was possible that that happened frequently. And so really you need a representative sample. I will leave the other two for Vignetta Charles to explain to you in that fabulous paper. In 2016, we got a new Supreme Court ruling that said that scientific research on the effect of restrictions and not just the lawmaker's stated purpose must be taken into account. And so this gave the Turnaway study even more reason to be, because not only did we want to know, does abortion hurt women, but do restrictions on abortion hurt women? And so hopefully lawmakers will consider what is the effect of abortion on women's lives compared to being denied an abortion. So that's the Turnaway study's aim, to describe the mental health, physical health, and socioeconomic consequences of both receiving an abortion and carrying an unwanted pregnancy to term among women who wanted an abortion. How we did this study is we went to 30 abortion facilities in 21 states across the United States, where if you're too far along in pregnancy for an abortion at that site, there's no one within 150 miles that can do a later abortion. And women from over 40 states actually came to these 30 sites to receive abortion. So we have wide coverage of women across the United States. From each site, we recruited 3 types of women: women who were just over the gestational limit and were turned away, women who were just under the gestational limit, and in these lectures, we call them near limit women. So they were just under the gestational limit but received their abortion. And then because most of these sites had gestational limits in the 2nd trimester, but 90% of women seeking abortion have their abortions in the 1st trimester, we wanted to know, was the abortion experience of the near limit abortion group typical? So we recruited also a woman in the 1st trimester for every 1 woman denied and every 2 women who received an abortion just under the limit. We didn't include women who were seeking abortions specifically for fetal anomaly. And our criteria at the time we started this study in 2007 was for pregnant women. And so to my knowledge, there are no trans men in the study. This is just a little graphic to show you that if you recruit women at 2 different sites with different gestational limits, you can get women who received and who were denied abortions at the very same gestation. So a woman at 19 weeks who went to site A would receive her abortion, but at site B, she would be denied. We ended up recruiting almost 1,000 women who sought abortions between 2008 and 2010. We have data on the births from 156 women who were denied an abortion and carried the pregnancy to term, and 405 in just under the limit in that near limit group. We followed all women for 6 years with semi-annual phone calls, phone interviews every 6 months, which we did in either English or Spanish according to the woman's preference. Another graphic. We did 956 baseline interviews, and here's how they break out in the sample. We'll try and use these same colors, green for Turnaway, dark blue for received an abortion just under the limit, and orange for first trimester throughout these lectures so that you can quickly see who's represented in a graph. We excluded all women from one site where the gestational limit was only 10 weeks and where nearly all the women who were denied an abortion traveled more than 150 miles and got their abortion somewhere else. So we actually ended up excluding that site. Here's a little bit of data about the sample by the 3 groups. You can see first trimester near limit and on the right Turnaway. There are some differences at baseline in age. Specifically, women who were denied an abortion were a little bit younger, 2 years younger on average than women who received an abortion. And you can see that on the in these graphs. And the reason has to do with women who are younger are less likely to recognize a pregnancy earlier and face more difficulties in accessing care. And for all of the studies, we controlled for age and we controlled for whether the women had had children before, so that our results are net of that difference, baseline difference. There are no differences in race ethnicity in the sample, so I didn't break it out into bars, but approximately 1/3 of the women were white and not Hispanic, 1/3 African American, just under 5% were Asian or Pacific Islander, about 5% were American Indian, and about 1 in 5 was Hispanic or Latina. So to address some of the concerns about the Turnaway Study sample, I just want to give a few slides about both representation and retention into the study. And then we'll stop this lecture, and the next lecture will pick up on results. So in this study, just over 1/3 of women agreed to participate. This is similar to other longitudinal studies. If you ever want to do a study that involves calling someone every 6 months, you'll find that not everyone wants to participate. But just because it's like other longitudinal studies doesn't mean that we didn't have some kind of selection problem where women who were agreed to be in the study were different from women who didn't. There's a couple nice things about our participation rate. One is that it varied tremendously by site. So at one site, fewer than 1 in 20 women agreed to participate, and at some sites, more than 2/3 of women agreed to participate. So it allowed us to see, well, did the results change when we just limit the sample to sites with a higher participation rate? And the nice news is that the results are exactly the same, but the sample goes down because there were about 3 sites with high recruitment rates and 3 with abysmal recruitment rates, and the rest of them were in the middle. And so we wanted to use all the data we collected, but we found that the results were robust to restricting it just to high recruitment sites. And the other thing is that what seemed to predict the participation rate had everything to do with the point person at the site and how engaged they were in research. So it wasn't that conservative sites had low participation rates and liberal states had high participation rates. It wasn't that at all. So here is the Turnaway Study compared. One way to check for selection bias is, does our sample vary from people who seek abortion nationally? So on the right is the Guttmacher Institute's data on abortion patients in 2008, the Turnaway Study, which recruited between 2008 and 2010. And you can see we nearly identically represent the population of women seeking abortions in clinics nationally. And here, the first 3 bars are the Turnaway Study sample populations, and on the right is abortion patients nationally. And you can see that the Turnaway patients, again, are disproportionately young, but that the rest of the sample, those who actually received their abortions, closely resemble the age distribution of abortion patients. Another concern about doing a longitudinal study and whether the results are valid is retention into the study. So we recruited about 1,100 women, and 85% of them, yielding a sample of 956, actually did their first interview. We found that in subsequent studies too, the biggest drop-off is from agreeing to be in the study to actually doing the first interview. We managed to keep 95% of the sample in the study from interview to interview. So we didn't lose very many women over time, and there were no differences in retention through 4.5 years by baseline mental health, emotions about the pregnancy, or study group until the very last interview, when we were slightly more likely to lose turnaway births between years 4.5 and 5. But note that the statistical models that we have accommodate loss to follow-up and are making unbiased estimates, assuming that the predictors of loss to follow-up are captured by the study. And we discuss this more in each of the academic papers that we published. We were able to link Turnaway Study, people who agreed to be in the study, the 1,100 women, to economic data from credit bureaus, and that will be a recommended reading for the lecture on socioeconomic outcomes done by Sarah Miller, a professor at the University of Michigan. And what she found was that the economic findings from this objective third-party linkage data set were unchanged from what we got from Women's Self-Report. And the Women's Self-Report, of course, is vulnerable to the loss to follow-up, the retention rate, and yet the results are the same when we have neither of those problems. So I'm confident that the results in the study are not unduly affected by either the participation rate or loss to follow-up over time. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy this lecture series.